on the direction of travel. In the opening segment, we were talking more about the wider perspective of SDG financing and opportunities for engagement with especially blended finance.
We have people also online.
Oh, I see. I'm behind the pole. Yeah. Okay, good. We were talking about opportunities for engagement on SDG finance through different sorts of vehicles, but in the opening around blended finance vehicles, etc. And of course, through the course of the workshop, there's been a lot of deep dives into various streams like that. One of the threads, since we're in the UN-only environment now, is that one of the key UN interfaces is what we've talked about along the way, and what we talked about in the context of the UN's position in blended finance vehicles, and that is often advanced well, both financially and structurally, but also in a reform orientation and in a strengthening the role of the system, the country team and the RC's role through the country level pooled funds. So I won't go into it because we don't really have much time, but just to say that, and we've talked bilaterally with many of you, and many of you have a lot of experience in ongoing initiatives like this, and the team here in Kenya is working through a new generation of a country level pooled fund. But as I was saying to a group just earlier, the messaging from a lot of our major member state partners is, because we agreed in a funding compact around reform to have better quality funding overall for the UN to deliver and less fragmented funding, and within that we agreed on pooled funding on, is that me? That's an echo. We agreed. I'll just drop them. Yeah, okay. We agreed on stepping up the level of engagement on the interagency pooled funding in order to advance that quality and help that synergetic effect of the UN. What a lot of member states have been saying, and this we heard in the ECOSOC panels last week from many of them, is that they are investing more through these sorts of vehicles. They do see it as a way of effecting change in a synergetic way for the SDG agenda, but they're saying on the ground at the country level, those options for funding the work of the UN to achieve SDG outcomes, a pooled funding option isn't always on offer to them. So they're saying, we're ready to put our resources this way, but your teams on the ground aren't always ready with an instrument that we can fund that way. So you got to make it a little easier for us, is kind of the message. If we live up to our commitments, you have to have the instruments ready. So there is a chicken and egg there, of course. We don't want to build an instrument without any interest, but we do have our part to play in getting them set up. So where does that stand now at the country level? There are ongoing country level pooled funds. So that means not the types of funds which are joint programs funded by, say, the Peace Building Fund or the Joint SDG Fund. Those are important. Those are joint programs on the ground. What I'm referring to now with these numbers are country level pooled funds like in Rwanda that have been there since the generation of Delivering as One and redone as a Rwanda SDG fund, or in Malawi or in Tanzania or in many other countries. There are 24 of those, 18 of those existing, ongoing and active. That's both many and not very many, actually, when you think of our global world. There are 16 in process, under design, and in advanced stages of working through the setup, and then another 17 which are sort of exploring the ideas. So at an earlier stage, but have brought it forward and are starting to think through. So I'm tired of my jet lag, but when you do that math, that's about 50 something. So that tells us that the reach of engagement for this sort of funding to support the new generation of the UN's positioning for the SDGs and country frameworks is ticking up which is great, but that there's a lot of work to do still going ahead to realize that opportunity where there is financing available for those instruments. What are we seeing in challenges? Other than the obvious, the resource environment that now we're sitting in with many funders pulling back on different levels, not just in interagency funding, but in general financing to the UN because of crisis around the world. Other sorts of challenges are related to ourselves as a system living up to our side of the bargain. Donors and member states are saying, under those general funding compact commitments, they're willing to step up their commitment to quality funding and flexible funding. They're willing to step up their quantity of their flexible funding and pooled funding. But from the UN side, since it's a compact, the UN made a commitment to a series of different quality features within these that are our side of the bargain. So it's not just open swimming pool in that sense with no character and distinction. It's a really pretty clearly structured and designed for purpose, clear outcomes, clear theories of change, very strong transparency measures, make sure we're building in that value proposition of the UN, which is our normative roles, and that those sorts of things are on the table. And it goes on and on. There's a very clear commitment. So that's I put it in the challenge category because it's important that we do that work. But it's a pretty good work in progress in the sense that we do see progress on those fronts. We're building it into a lot of our systems in the MPTF office to make it easier for everybody, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. So in the standard features and interfaces when you set up the pooled funds, there are standard requirements and features and visibility tools and all that kind of stuff, so you can use those platforms to help with your donor engagements, etc. Let me turn to my colleagues and see what else that would be really important to reinforce on the issue of country-level pooled fund engagements, either opportunities, challenges, or trends or examples, very briefly, and then I won't eat much more. We can have some questions and answers or discussion points if there are any, and then we won't eat much more into keeping time for the closing, because I know people all have trains and planes and cars to catch. Eva and Malena, what Eva, especially you work on these funds.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to come here if there is a camera. So I think you did a pretty good summary of the challenges that we are finding those days on pool funding at country level. I will just add a suggestion, which is that whenever you are designing a fund, it's very important that you engage with your partners, and not only the UN family, but any other partner that you may think might be on board. And this speaks to contributors, but also to civil society or other, now that we're talking so much about private sector, even having those conversations from the beginning, because this really will help you to have the buy-in, and also they will be part of the design. So all the points of views and approaches that they will be looking for afterwards, they will be already they will have been discussed and maybe integrated into those instruments. So from my experience, this has been always this has been one of the parts that has been missing, and this has been one of the main reasons that many pool funds have not been successful. So just giving you some tips on that. Yes, thank you.
Maybe I would just underscore one last point on one of the features to think through if and when you're embarking on either the design or startup or structuring and implementation of a pooled fund at the country level, and that is how they can be extra value in the innovation space, because that really is an advantage in the type of flexible facility that a pooled fund has. It allows you a little more strategic flexibility than a project type approach that agencies might be moving ahead with doing very good work in innovation, but if you can bring together both those capacities of the system that way, and then structure the instrument because it gives you the opportunity to use it as a place for investment, project incubation, or a place for doing the sort of work that the SDG Partnership Platform has done here with the advanced analytics and program pipeline and solutions development on the pooled grant side of it, so that the investment and private financing can accompany. So there's many standards to pooled funds, but then there's lots of different ways that they can be applied that are adapted to context, and each context is quite different, but their ability to help the system innovate is a really important feature. After lunch, and it's warm, and the coffee didn't come, so I'm happy to leave that as a summary on the country level pooled funds. Our job in the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office is to support country teams, the resident coordinators and colleagues anywhere around the world who are incubating these ideas, who have a challenge with bringing together a joint effort, who want to be able to respond to this environment. And formally, our mandate is interagency financing, design and administration, plus knowledge services. So in the rubric of design and knowledge services, it's kind of fancy language for just give us a call whenever you want to work something through, and both on the where are the tips and what other countries have been doing and what have we seen as successful, or what are some of the design ideas and how to structure that. We're happy to assist. The administration part then comes once the fund is actually established and set up, and we provide those kind of back office services on fiduciary trusteeship roles, handling your legal agreements, handling all your fiduciary roles and transfers, the transparency side, etc. So that's what we're here for, and we look forward to supporting you in any way. Stephen.
I'm going to ask a provocative.
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask a provocative question in the interest of igniting a discussion, because you're right, it is after lunch, and I'm sure a lot of us are creaking, notwithstanding the interest and the importance of the topic. So you've heard me on this one many times, the disconnect between what partners are saying about joined up funding at the global level versus what they're saying on the ground. And so I found myself scurrying back to look at the funding compact, because I'm always looking for arguments, right? And I'm always looking to be able to say, in as nice a way as I can, to a donor partner here on the ground in Nairobi, you're actually out of kilter with what your own capital is saying at global level, right? The funding compact, I want to read this because I think it was very carefully crafted. I'm reading from the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation website because they were so instrumental in the funding compact. The funding compact is a strategic framework for change mutually welcomed by United Nations member states and UN entities. To what extent did the membership sign on to the funding compact? And so to what extent can we use that as a stick to beat people with? To be quite blunt. What status does it have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think my short answer is it has status, so use it. What is the status of it? Is that it was negotiated following, it was mentioned in the reform resolution. So the resolution was adopted, and then the compact itself was included as an annex, if I remember correctly, to the subsequent resolution that came. Now, so in that sense, it has character and it can be referred to. Somewhere in the language, as you say, they're always kind of carefully crafting, because they can't, of course, impose it as a mandatory commitment on everyone. So there is language that says this is a voluntary undertaking. So that is what lets off the hook anybody who really wasn't intending to increase their core to 30% of their overall UN contributions or something. But it was formally adopted as a follow-on to the resolution. So we can sort of send you all those references so it's easy to refer to. And then there's a monitoring annex that goes along with it. You're very. This will keep you awake, Stephen. Yeah, exactly. There's a monitoring matrix with the indicators of who needs to do what and by when and how the progress is going. That's formally monitored as part of the QCPR resolution. And that's what, like last week in ECOSOC, was under review again. So there's a report, Secretary General's report just came out, and it reviews the funding compact, and everybody comments on it, etc. So it has more character in that sense than any sort of loose funding commitments that may have been made as a statement of good intent kind of thing by member states before then. So it has more teeth than that, but was written as voluntary. So that's the squishy part.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Malena, you may after. I don't know if you want to, if there's anything else to add on that, but after if you want to.
Yeah, she can add. Okay.
No, she's saying no, but
Okay.
unless you want to.
So I have Stephen was saying provocative, but I also have one. It's not maybe provocative, but maybe based on my own experience. I was wondering, and maybe it's also be a question for the SDG Fund and also for you, Jennifer. I was wondering how feasible it is to aggregate all the fund that we are doing at country level and have a kind of launch for replenishment. Because I was always puzzled by the fact that even organization like IFAD, who is working like a financier bank, or FDB, or even the World Bank IDA, they organize conference and replenishment. And there's a lot of money floating in. And how as UN on the SDG, we cannot have. I said that to Helen Clark in March, I think in Madagascar, it was 2013, we had the resident representative, and I was chairing the committee on that. And I said, me, if I were you, if our strategy is good, the best way is to say, is someone buying our strategy? So I don't know if something could be either discussed or work out. And I know the SURF is doing the same thing. They are having replenishment conference. The JPEG is doing the same thing for the education. Yeah. Global Fund just did it. So why as UN we cannot go that route? The second is related to Uzbekistan. I don't know the case. I was told by Robert that their 8 billion cooperation framework or something like that. It was a
million, but
yeah.
It's a couple of zeros different.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It was really a huge amount of money. But in fact, the full cooperation framework funded through something. Yeah. So if you have idea on that, yeah. I'll be. Thank you so much. But you are feel free not to answer.
Yeah. Just, no, I'm happy to. Yeah. So on your first point, Fode, I think you're right. We could do a lot better in systematic approaches to capitalization in a way that aggregates things a bit more and plans forward things a bit more. It's not that the UN doesn't do it at all, but we do it in pockets, like your examples, right? The SURF has an annual sort of pledging type of thing. IFAD has its institutional replenishment. It's slightly different, of course, because it's a lending facility, but the same idea. And so if your question is kind of at country level, could we do the same sort of thing? Is that what you meant, or did you mean globally? Yeah. So globally, there. Yeah. Yeah. It's very hard because the constituencies are so different and the locus is very different. So it's not to say there's not some that could be done. And Stephen might remember this from your former HAT days, leading into the ambition to step up the peace building fund, for example. It wasn't just organize a pledging conference for the peace building fund. It was quite a lot of analytical work on peace building financing. What is the landscape of it? What's out there? And how in many different doors and windows and pockets the UN is engaged with it? And how could we do a better job at a more consolidated offer and position the peace building fund as a more central vehicle in that? And in that process, we did manage to kind of consolidate. I forget now how many there were, but there were, 27 different related forms of peace building financing around the landscape of the UN, just at the global level, not even country levels, but the partnership, DPA and UNDP and the joint program on this, and then, coming at it from many different angles. So there was some success at consolidating some of that with the better center of gravity with the Peace Building Fund, recognizing that it has its distinct characteristics as well. So some of that has been done. It's pretty hard to do it more writ large, because then you really get into financing and reform of a different sort, and you get into governing bodies and all of those things that have, you hit walls even in the reform process. But it's a good general point, and we should aspire to it in subcluster, in country contexts or in thematic contexts, because the instinct is correct. Absolutely, I agree. So Uzbekistan is an interesting example, and it will apply as a possible example in some countries and not at all in others. But that is a case where there was it's an illicit financial flows. That's that part of financing for development that it capitalizes on. So there was a recovery of stolen assets through a proper legal process under the UN Convention on Anti-Corruption. That was recovered, that were held in Switzerland in Swiss banks. There was a legal process around it, and as part of the settlement of the legal process of $800 million in its first tranche that was recovered to go back to the people of Uzbekistan, then between Switzerland and Uzbekistan, they negotiated that the financial vehicle to channel that back to Uzbekistan should be a UN-held trust because of the convention and our role in the convention and the UN's role on the ground. So we put together a country-level UN pooled fund, totally anchored around the SDGs and thank you. Oh, more this way. But this one isn't for publicity yet until we get the ink signed in about another month. So don't put this on the web. So a formal legal bilateral agreement between Uzbekistan and Switzerland on how those recovered assets would be channeled back to Uzbekistan. And they decided that a UN interface on that was the appropriate way to do it for all those convention reasons and because of our presence on the ground and an SDG mandate. And so essentially, the country team got together and put a fund together to support the cooperation framework. And Uzbekistan normally delivers $100 million a year, all in the whole UN system. So suddenly their cooperation framework is 8 times as ambitious as it was, because they now have a cooperation framework where they can scale up and deliver $800 million. So they have actually I don't know what the resource mobilization people are going to do, but they've got it's kind of a good problem to have. But yeah, so they're going to be fully funded up front for the whole cooperation framework, and they've come together with a pooled fund and a structure and a strategy and an outcome level. So it's not the only country, of course, that has important restitution agreements and other sorts of reflows back to the country from these sort of legal settlements. There are many. And so it's not the first one we've done, but it's the first one at that scale. We had a smaller one in a couple of other countries. So it is an interesting one, and it's one that we're kind of looking into as another non-traditional source of financing, but it puts, it came about because of the wrong reasons, but it puts the UN on the right side of that equation on restitution back to the people and the country where it came. So. Yeah, please. And then whoever is our timekeeper, just, tell me when to stop.
Hello. The PDFO from Tunisia.
And thank you a lot for all these 3 days for the presentation and the inspiring platform and initiatives. Ms. Topping, thank you very much, and your team for your support in the process of elaborating the MPTF.
You're one of those influenced ones.
Yes. Actually, my question is about communication. So we are in progress, as you know, and I want to know if you have a communication strategy as at a global level, or you should do it maybe locally with your support.
So I would say the latter, because the important part of much of the communication around this sort of partnership and instruments is going to be local context, is going to be what it is that the fund is focused on and what's important for the environment you're operating in, etc. So I think that at the heart of the communications messages will be best, in a way, shaped from the country level, but absolutely from our point of view, we can support on some of those other rounded out communications messages of what are some of the important added values of this kind of approach when it comes to innovation or reform or SDGs or impact or whatever. So we're happy to support you, but we know that the content and the local messaging context you'll lead with. Good. Yeah, Melinda, did you want to come in on anything else, or are you good? Yeah.
Well, if you can stay in the room for the last
staying in the room and
30 minutes,
call us, and you know where to find us, and we're here at your service is the bottom line of all of this.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Eva. Thanks, colleagues. We are actually reaching at the very end of the workshop. There is no more presentations. There are no more panels. Don't get scared. This is really last session to just reflect on what we have done. And just before we go, just an applause to Elaine that really has helped our team to make it possible. And we'll do proper thanks also to the larger team of Stephen and his wonderful team. But before getting to that, we wanted just to have maybe a half an hour of reflection on the summit. This for us was the first mission. I think Jennifer started the meeting with that, and definitely the first event after almost 2 years of Zoom meetings. And of course, when we try to bring back private sector, we try to engage them. You know, we also learn while we do. So I wanted just to use this space for reflection, both on the event but also on what the UN does in this space. So I would not take and say more. So I would just open the floor for your feedback, both on those days as well as for your reflection. I think some were shared also by our resident coordinators in the room in the previous session. So. Again, we need to move that out. So I'm really opening now the floor for your a bit of reflection and comments. Who is brave enough to have some reflections and kick us out in this discussion? Yeah, please, Marlena. Yes.
Thank you. I just going to say, I think it's very often when you come to these events and arranged by the UN family or donors, you talk about the private sector. But in this case, you had quite a few of the private sector representatives in this meeting, and I think that was quite unique. And also a very good example of UN as a convener. And during the first day, I think we kept coming back to the same problems. So we know the problems, but we also have seen quite a few of the solutions. And I think that was very comforting, and also having, like I say, the different stakeholders in the discussion. So I think that has been very comforting for the future of the partnerships. Thank you.
Please.
No, thanks. No, Max, I just wanted to say that when we were discussing the idea of sort of a joint co-convening SDG fund, high-level team coming from the stratosphere in New York down to the ground in the Silicon Savannah, and then the team down here and saying, how is this going to happen? How is this going to work? And I must say, we were so delighted at just the incredible chemistry and teamwork that unfolded. And our entire team is really warmed up so much to the work that you and Elaine and the team back home, Heidi and everyone else has done. So that, first of all, is to say a huge thank you to you and to the team, and convey that back to Lisa as well, please. Secondly, to say that I think the caliber of discussions, particularly day one and some bits of day two, really were brought to the next level, because just the kind of panels that came together, the kinds of discussions, the kind of moderating that happened. And I've had extremely strong positive feedback from all these private sector networks and partners who came in. So, I must just compliment you that many of them felt that this wasn't just a talk shop. This was really a very serious discussion, and they were really delighted that we were able to bring that caliber of discussion. So I think I'm very encouraged that this could actually be one in a series of perhaps periodic convenings we could do maybe once a year or once in 2 years. Thanks.
Thank you.
The only thing I didn't understand, but we'll pick that up with Jennifer, is the link between the SDG joint fund and the MPTF, because we've been talking about both in parallel. And I'm thinking to myself, but why couldn't this $7 million just come right through our Kenya MPTF? But I think there's some small print that stopped that from happening. I'd love to show throughput to my donors to say, guys, this is skin in the game. Let's leverage some more. But I'm sure there's some rules there that hold us back from doing that.
Thank you, Arif. Just to echo what you just said, I think in the main room I was referring to the fact that we learned a lot through this process. And just to agree with you that the caliber of the private sector which was involved in this process was quite high, and it gives us a lot of ideas on how we can actually engage with them, because they were open enough to try and let us understand how they make their own decisions, which was quite eye-opening. Now, when you look at the composition of that private sector, I think your recommendation of looking at how we get the entire value chain, maybe in this type of workshop, it's going to be challenging to have all of them around the table so that we can have a meaningful discussion. This time was around financing. In the meantime, at the country level, we did manage to get some doers, as they call themselves, the operators. And when you look at the supply chain, you do have the financiers, you have the outcome supporters, you have the investors, and then you have the doers, the operators. How do we bring those, the operators and the financiers, together so that they can also speak the same language? It's something we can also explore as we go forward to make sure that the same way we try to understand the language of the private sector so that we can work with them. I noticed that the small enterprises are also struggling to understand the language of those who are meant to be financing the de-risking facilities and the blended finances, etc., etc. So there is a capacity aspect embedded into ourselves in terms of how we improve our capacities to understand that language, but there is also a capacity dimension to have both the doers and the financiers speak to each other in this type of dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not going, I agree with most of what have been said. I think it's time for you to speak and share. Please, Charles. It's coming.
So first of all, just a huge appreciation to your team and the leadership from Kenya. Greatly appreciated. Really good work. And I guess you've de-risked this, to use the language. So I think it's a conversation that we can have. And I think it just needs to grow and become more viral in the UN, because it's a significant shift that the whole of the UN needs to make, not a kind of niche silo of nerds, as it were. And so I think this is a really important dialogue, and I second the notion that it should be annual. I want to even go as far as creating a rod for Ghana's back by offering to host the next one. And I think this will be really, really important to, as part of making it viral, to go to the West Coast to take that initiative. There's a lot happening there as well. Nigeria is close enough by too that we can make it truly regional, sub-regional, and get a lot of actors in the room, not just around financing, but I think also the significant other end of financing is the pipeline, because money has to meet something in order to actually work. So I think those two are really important. And just to continue, like I always say, that there are 4 things that make me feel like I have a credibility gap when I enter these conversations. The first is the mindsets, and how do we shift significant volumes of mindset, not in a space like this, because this is preaching to the converted, but how do we spread this word and spread it to level, even though maybe the capacities aren't necessarily at economies of scale, they're not appropriately put in every country, but how do we spread the mindset there? And how do we have those capacities located in the strategic places, use the regional structures that are being set up, the sort of issue-based coalitions, to actually get the work going? But also, how do we shift the accountability away from us? And I think it's a bit of a humility job to understand what our role is, and that we're not the center of the universe. We're actually an actor. It's our success is our ability to put those actors in the forefront and lead from behind. And I think the tough conversation about where and how we get the resources placed in a way that we can do this in an agile and nimble way, and not have to negotiate time and time again with different people. And I think those messages need to go back to HQ about how we put resources together in a different way that allows us to really make this more mainstream within the UN. But I really wanted to say I've appreciated being here. If anything, though, I would have brought 2 or 3 more people, and I think we should plan for something really big and effective next year, and really put all the actors in the room and get people in the UN thinking very effectively. Inspirational. Thank you, Kenya, and thank you to the Secretariat.
Well, what best way to have a last session where we have actually an horizon for our next step that is very practical. The floor is still open for also some reflections from our colleagues. That, yeah, please. While I'm trying to follow the.
Thank you. Mine is just to register my appreciation for this very explosive session, and also to appreciate the fact that we have demystified the UN funding process, because there is a lot of mystification behind how the UN works in terms of how to get the funding. And these kind of sessions, they try to give people the insight of what normally happens. So it's not free money, but it's money that people work for, and we are trying to create that trust. My appeal to you going forward is, if possible, some of this network can be expanded, and perhaps if we can have plenty of this kind of mystification can be demystified. Thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate it. Colleagues, any other thoughts also in response of what some of our audience suggested, both in the role of the UN as well as how we can continue to keep up the engagement with the private sector? Okay, perfect. I think we are reaching a bit after very intense 3 days, and particularly with the colleagues that also managed to follow all our session this morning and this early afternoon. We will send an evaluation formally, so please do, and we will of course look for a bit more also of detailed suggestions on how to make things better. We were planning also matching platform that at the end, unfortunately, we were not able to design as we have wished. So we had also a few other dreams to make. But perhaps that is a call for Ghana and for the next summit. We also would like to say that, particularly from the fund level, we are the joint programs that you represent. So that's for us is the core asset of the fund, of the UN joint forces together. Your programs is what we want really to showcase. Your work is what we want to showcase. We are just a small team in New York, hosted gracefully by MPTFO in trying to do that. So thanks for, and Stephen will formally close the event just after me, but just wanted to thank particularly, as it was said before, the Kenyan team has been a very intense journey for the past couple of months, and we have known each other finally also in person, but it has been a very good experience. So thanks again to all our hosts, and I see most of the colleagues here. I think Stephen will make the formal thank you note, but thanks, and Stephen, over to you for final considerations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Max. And perhaps a big hand for our compere. Now let's see if I can live by my own rules and not knock over this chair as I also move around. Before I get to the thanks, which is the main business, let me just offer a few substance points on next steps, and thanks as always to Charles, who has made the job very easy for me, because I was going to look around for a volunteer, but was thinking very much in the logic that you put forward, Charles. We need to go west. So that's a very nice symmetry there. And there is, I think, a real cluster of expertise, a deep bench of that in the West African theatre, and particularly around Ghana, and perhaps Ghana and Nigeria together. So I think that's terrific, and pledge all support from the excellent team here to do the relay to you, so that we can feed in, what's worked, and perhaps also on the basis of the feedback we'll get from that survey, what could have been improved, so that we can really help you make it a smashing success. So looking forward to AIMS Summit 2.0 in Ghana next year. In terms of streams of work for that, it seems to me we've been juggling, at least in the time that I've been able to be part of this, juggling a couple of different related streams of innovation within the UN. The first, obviously, is around multi-partner trust funds, one funds, pooled funding, which, given, and we were talking about this just before lunch, Jennifer and I, given that the first experiments with that in Tanzania, in Vietnam, and a few other places were almost 20 years ago in the UN, it's actually quite staggering that we're still at the design stage in many countries, including Kenya. So I think that's testament. On the one hand, the pessimistic view of that is it's difficult to do. On the other hand, the fact that all of us are still endeavoring to do it speaks to the importance of it. So that's the first stream. The second is around the engagement of the Joint SDG Fund and its catalytic funding. The whole point of the Joint SDG Fund is to do what we're talking about, is to make a significant, but still in scalar terms, relatively small financial investment from a UN trust fund in order to unlock much larger sums of capital. And I think by the time we get to Ghana next year, we will have had 5 or more years in which we can really take stock of how well is that working, and are we living up to that ambition? And if not, why not? And if yes, how? So I think looking at where the Joint SDG Fund has been engaged will be very important. Third, obvious one, is all of us in this tent, and many others who weren't able to make it this time, but who are perhaps online, working with the private sector. And how is that working out? There's a lot of accumulated experience now of platforms of this kind, of doing the kinds of due diligence that's necessary, the structural challenges that I think we've talked about over the last 3 days, of the disconnect between the offer at the level of private sector investment and the size of the available deal, and how we get through that mismatch. So those would be 3, but there's a fourth that we haven't, I think, so much discussed, and that I would love to see us bring into the conversation next year. And that's the role of integrated national financing frameworks, INFFs. Many of us, and particularly through the support of the Joint SDG Fund, are experimenting with INFFs in country. And my shorthand, whenever I'm challenged to say, well, what does an INFF do? I say it basically tries to align all available development financing, public and private, national and international, with the expressed development priorities of the country. Now, if you're trying to do that, that implies that at the moment they're not aligned. Right? And that, I think, is a challenge we face in many countries. The more and more we're working upstream in the policy space, we tend to be helping the countries we support to design very beautiful state-of-the-art policies, but which are then not sustained through the flow of national budgets or in any other way. And so for me, a check-in on how the INFF processes are going across the continent and where the private sector figures and features in those, because at the moment that's a bit of a missing piece for me, at least in Kenya. So those would all be streams, I think, that we could offer for AIMS 2.0 in Ghana, and really looking forward to engaging with all of you on helping Charles to design that. To come to the thanks then, which is the fun bit, and with the caveat that with my jet lag, I'm almost certain to forget some people, but consider yourselves thanked anyway. I'll start with, again, Charles, your quip there about de-risking. Well, one of the ways in which we clearly managed to de-risk this AIMS summit was that you decapitate the two hosts, right? Lisa from the Joint SDG Fund wasn't able to make it at the last minute, and then at even more of the last minute, I wasn't able to make it either, and yet it's been a resounding success. That speaks to a number of things. The leadership in this tent. It speaks to the role of the friends who I will thank by name in a second, from Joint SDG Fund, from MPTFO, and from UN Kenya. But I'm going to start with Jennifer, because it particularly speaks to you, Jennifer. You flew all this way, you got off a plane early in the morning, came straight into battle, and found yourself essentially the host. The hostess with the mostess, as the song used to say. So thank you so much, and I'd love us, exactly. And Max, to you and Elaine as well, very much the same, for really stepping into the breach there. Your full team, so Jennifer, Eva, Marlena, and everybody from the MPTFO who was involved in the heavy lift of putting this together. I do have to thank my own incredible team. Was there anybody on the RCO payroll that wasn't involved in this? Could I just say thank you, RCO, but just pull out a few names? I've got to start, of course, with Arif, who we regularly describe as the genius behind the SDG Partnership Platform. And the fifth work stream for Ghana should be cloning. There are a couple of key individuals in this sector who need to be cloned, and Arif is the head of the line. Alongside you, Arif, Sari, Ulrika, Augustine, Zenabu, Kennedy, Grace, everyone. Yeah, all right. Please stand up and be recognized, those of you in the room. Yeah, Arif, Sari, Ulrika, Zenabu, terrific, yeah. Kimati, thank you so much. Steve, I told you I'd start forgetting people. Oh, Mariana, where are you? Mariana, stand up and be recognized. Vene as well. I told you I could go on and on and on. I really want then to thank you, the participants, the very active participants. Particularly want to thank my brothers, the RCs, Charles, Fode, Isa, and Eddie I think has gone on to another engagement, but really amazing. And will you forgive me if within that we recognize our doyen, Fode, who is retiring is the wrong word. There's no way you're retiring. You're just you're a butterfly. You're going on into another state of being and another state of engagement. But mid-June, It's hard to believe that Fode is stepping down as RC, and your leadership has just been incredible, my brother. So thank you so much. But thanks to you all for really making the time to join us, to the colleagues that came from the RCOs, to the colleagues that came from the many UNCTs, some of you having to do extraordinary journeys to make it to Kenya. Just really very, very grateful to all of you. And please take our greetings back to your countries. To the members of the Kenya UNCT, some of whom are actually seconded to our partnership platform and to the RCO, some of whom lend that time voluntarily alongside their day jobs. Really want to say a major thanks to you as well. And finally, and not the least of all, to this amazing hotel. Has anybody else got lost on this campus? It's quite nice getting lost on this campus. You discover new bits that you never knew about before, but that are all equally wonderful and pretty. It's an incredible place. And as I did mention before, the ownership of this extraordinary establishment are also major players in the private sector engagement for the SDGs. So that's something that we celebrate too. And to our media team, everybody involved in comms, everybody involved, in short, in everything. Simply just to close by saying Asante ni sana, which is thanks to you all, and Safari Njema, which means a good journey, because some of you have very long ways to go to get home. So thank you so much. With that, I think our business is done, and looking forward to Ghana. No? No, you can't thank me. I wasn't even here. You can't thank me.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we have actually a coffee break. Is that for us? Do we know? And just, yeah, so we also have for final, if you say final goodbye, there should be a coffee break just waiting for you. Thank you.
Yeah, but here for 2 hours. No, it's 2.5. If tomorrow she wants to come, working together.
Exactly. I was thinking of that. Exactly.
We'll do it. Absolutely. So we have live to do. But we'll keep in touch. It was really a great pleasure. Munir, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure. No, pleasure. Thank you for the presentation. Extend my regards. I hope it was great job. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Take care. It was a pleasure meeting you.